The railways of Britain have many quirks, hence why they're so interesting. One such quirk is parliamentary services. These occur because closing a station or line requires a lot of effort and a long legal process, so instead of going through all that hassle, it's much easier to just provide a bare minimum service as stated in the train operator's contracts. Here's a list I made of many of them, although apologies if I missed a couple. Unsurprisingly, most of these stations are very lightly used, but this leaves you with stations which, while challenging to visit, feel hidden and special. The stations I'll talk about in this video are the parliamentary stations on the Cotswold and Malvern line between Oxford and Worcester. This line is usually served from one train an hour, a London IET which, after running fast to Oxford, calls at most stations along the line: Hanborough, Charlbury, Kingham, Morton-in-Marsh, Honeybourne, Evesham, Pershore and Worcestershire Parkway, then into Worcester, after which they usually continue further to Great Malvern or Hereford. Large parts of the line are single track, between Wolvercote Junction near Oxford and Charlbury, and between Evesham and Norton Junction just after Worcestershire Parkway, so only one train an hour runs at most times, although they can usually just about manage two during peak hours. However, there are an additional 4 stations between Hanborough, Charlbury and Kingham, which are Combe, Finstock, Ascott-under-Wychwood and Shipton. Each of these stations is only served by one train a day in each direction, colloquially known as the Finstock Flyer. This is the 7 o'clock Worcester Hill to Didcot train going southbound in the morning, and the 17:05 Didcot to Evesham train going northbound in the evening, with the exception of Shipton, which is also served by one London-bound service and 2 Worcester-bound services as extra stops on normal London trains. The Finstock Flyer does not run on weekends, so none of these stations get any trains on the weekend, except Shipton, which still has a couple evening calls on Saturday, but not a Sunday. Unsurprisingly, this leaves them as the 4 least used stations in Oxfordshire, typically with Finstock as the least used. Unlike the rest of the services on the line, this service is operated by a 2-car network turbo as an extension of the normal slow Didcot Parkway to Oxford trains. I also found trying to catch it's prone to delays, as in a way it's not the highest priority. It seems the same unit first forms the first Oxford to Worcester train of the morning, which weirdly doesn't stop until Morton-in-Marsh, before then becoming the southbound morning train, and then after running the northbound service to Evesham in the late afternoon, which weirdly skips Honeybourne, I believe because recently I remember it terminating at Morton-in-Marsh, then running empty to Evesham, so now it just stays in service as it goes to Evesham. Anyway, after reaching Evesham, it then forms an extra train to Oxford. Also, I believe at some point until a few years ago, the parliamentary service was provided by a London-bound IET, making a couple extra stops. Anyway, now I'll go into a bit more detail on each of the stations from when I visited them at various points over the past months, starting with the southern end at Combe. Combe, which I'm not fully sure if it's pronounced Combe or Combe, seems to be the most isolated of the 4 stations, with just a single fairly low effort platform, single bench and a single sign, which naturally is still branded with First Great Western. It does at least, like the others, have a dot matrix display to show the single train that stops here in each direction. The station opened here in 1935 as Combe Halt by the original Great Western Railway, not the same company as the modern day operator, originally with 2 platforms as the whole line was double tracked back then. It is not to be confused with Combe Junction Halt, spelt with 2 O's, which is on the Lou Valley line in Cornwall, which also happens to be a very underused station, I believe the least used in Cornwall. It vaguely serves the village of Combe about half a mile away, but surrounding the station is mostly just peaceful countryside. The only other nearby thing of note is the nearby Combe Mill, which was built in the workshop for the nearby Blenheim Palace, opening in 1852. Combe Station is also not that far from Hanborough Station, being almost as close as Hanborough Station to the village of Long Hanborough. However, it is far less used due to its sparse service. I think there's something vaguely charming about it though, and it's probably the quaintest station I've ever been to. Next along the line is Finstock, which usually ranks as the least used station in Oxfordshire, although it has been Combe in the past. In 2024 it received 1,112 passengers in total, which, bearing in mind that no trains call on weekend, is approximately 5.5 passengers a day. This opened in 1934 as Finstock Halt. At the time the original GWR were building lots of halts. While the exact definition of a halt is hard to pin down, for the GWR there were small unstaffed stations usually with nothing more than a shelter and were often request stops. Because they were so cheap they were easy to set up, with the benefit that you could test for demand in the area and upgrade the station if it was appropriate. If there was low demand, that's fine as it was cheap to set up in the first place. Like Combe, Finstock had 2 platforms, however now the single track is the former southbound line, with the current platform occupying the former space in the northbound line. which can be seen happening in these photos here, which I found when researching the station. This does though create a problem for if they were to redouble the line, because the platform's in the way. Finstock serves the village of Finstock, although it is quite far, and the tiny village of Fawler, but it does probably have the best bus connections of the 4 stations from the nearby Fawler Lane. However, once again, besides the long ramp leading up to the main road, there's nothing much in the immediate vicinity of the station besides fields. Being the least used though, it does probably make it the most interesting to visit. Not very far from Finstock, next down the line is Charlbury, but this gets a regular service, so I'll skip talking about it. The third parliamentary station is Ascott-under-Wychwood, not to be confused with Ascot in Berkshire on the Waterloo to Reading line. This is the only of the 4 I haven't had a chance to get out at yet. However, of the 4 it's probably the best located, being in the middle of the village with the same name, although it's still a relatively small place here, hence the limited service. It actually opened at the same time as the original line built in 1851 as part of the Oxford, Worcester and Wolverhampton Railway, and today it has 2 platforms, with the second being re-added when this part of the line was redoubled in 2011. It probably is the best contender for being upgraded with a regular service, especially if they were to invest in the facilities, probably with a good car park or something. Not very far down the line is Shipton, which is, as I mentioned earlier, the only of these stations to receive any other trains, making it slightly easier to get to. It opened not long after the line's opening in 1853. It serves the largest of the settlements of the 4, being near the villages of Shipton-under-Wychwood and Milton-under-Wychwood. However, it is quite poorly located, with long access roads to the main road, with one side almost hidden behind a mill, and even then you are quite a way away from the village centres. But, likely due to the extra trains that stop there, including on a Saturday, it is the most used of the 4 stations, but still the 4th least used station in Oxfordshire. Randomly, while searching it, I also discovered a disused station with a similar name that isn't too far away, called Shipton on Cherwell Halt, which was on an abandoned line to Woodstock, north of Kidlington. Once again, I think there is potential at Shipton for a regular service. I'd probably say only one out of it and Ascott-under-Wychwood should be kept, as they're relatively close together. Oh, and when I was there I had no idea what was going on with this dot matrix. My recording here highlights one of the other problems with these stations, though. During winter, trains almost exclusively call at them when it's dark, so they are hard to visit at this time of year. I filmed this in October, back before daylight savings had ended. When I was visiting some of them, there were a few passengers that got off at the same time as me, and I think when the main strategy is to cycle to one of these stations, park your bike, I'm fairly sure all of them had a couple bike racks, and take the one train in and out, most likely to Oxford. But why don't GWR run a regular service to them? Well, it's clear that most of these stations are not very well located, and they would rather be closed. But due to the bureaucracy of modern railways, closing these stations would require a lot of effort, with consultations and proof of adequate alternatives that don't exist. So it's easier to just provide one train a day in order to keep them open. And GWR don't want to provide a regular service as they do not see adequate demand, even though the main reason for their low passenger numbers is their sparse surface. However, I think some of the stations do have potential, and for proof of concept, let me talk about a 5th station, Hanborough. It first opened a couple of years after the line in 1853, originally called Handborough with a D, but in the 90s, at the same time as the other 4, it also received a parliamentary service with one train a day. However, since then it has been upgraded with a bigger car park and proper waiting room, along with the dedicated housing development built next door. And of course, almost every train stops there now, and because of that it has jumped to the 9th busiest station in Oxfordshire, out of 23, and one of the most important on the line. Proof that stations with seemingly no use can be revitalised with some investment. By the way, it, along with the others, had been cited to close in the breaching cuts, but look at where it is now. It has been discussed many times about fully redoubling the line, to allow boosted service. This upgrade will probably one day go ahead, and if it were to do so there could be at least 2 trains an hour regularly, including faster trains that skip stops. I have also seen a good suggestion that could even be implemented now for the London to Worcester trains that use 2 5-carriage IETs which separate at Oxford, with one running express and the other running local. However, I worry about the future for the parliamentary stations. While it would be sad to see, it probably makes sense for Finstock and Combe to close. They would require heavy upgrades and to add a second track, and they don't seem worth it given locations. I do maybe see potential for there to still be a station between Hanborough and Charlbury, but I don't know what that would look like. As for Shipton and Ascott-under-Wychwood, I think one could be kept and enhanced with a regular service, but probably only one, and otherwise it would slow down trains too much. although I'm sure things will stay as they are for a while, given the typical rate of getting things done on the railways. These are just a few of the parliamentary stations in the country, but I would say they are quite fun to try and visit, at least while you can.